This is Arvin Vora, founder of Vora Method and author of The Equation for Excellence, How to Make Your Child Excel at Math. In this video, I'm going to tell you something that's going to sound impossible. But first, I'm going to describe what most people do when they read any standardized test passage, whether that's the SAT, the GRE, the GMAT, the LSAT, MCAT, take your pick. This is what people do. Their mind says, okay, this is just one short passage. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to just take all the information in the passage and try to short-term juggle it in the mind like this juggler over here. So they do that. They read the passage. Now they're just juggling all this information in their mind, right? Then they look at the first question. Now here's the thing. It's hard enough to try to juggle all the information in the passage in your mind anyway. The second that you look at the first question, it's almost like it's like you're as if this guy added one more ball to juggle. He wouldn't drop one ball, he'd probably drop all of them. So at this point, what happens? You read the first question, and then you look back at the passage. And you might look at the passage either one time for that first question, you might look at it 2 times or maybe 3 times. You then answer the first question. And you do the same thing for each of the questions. So if there's 15 questions, you might look back at the passage 15 times or 30 times or maybe 45 times if you're doing it 3 times per question. And all of this is built on this idea that you're just going to kind of short-term juggle this information. Now, here's what I'm going to tell you right now. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound just insanely impossible. So just suspend disbelief for a moment. You can decide it's crazy in a second, and most of you will. And until you actually get to this level, this is going to keep on sounding crazy. But what if I told you that when you take a standardized test, when you actually get your reading to the perfect score level, and that's what we're about at Vora Method. I want you guys to be able to get perfect scores on reading, whether you're doing the GMAT or the GRE, LSAT, MCAT, whatever, SAT, ACT, that when you get to that level of reading, and when you take the actual test, by the end of that test, you are going to know more stuff about the world than you did at the beginning. The reason is that each of those passages that you're going to read is going to have some kind of information. It's going to be about something. And so because of that, you're going to know more because you'll have actually read and deeply understood the passages that you're doing. Now your mind says, whoa, that's impossible. How could I ever do something like that? And there's so much time pressure and all that. And by the way, I'm not saying you're going to memorize the passages or that you're going to be able to recall every word for life. Just like if you watch a TV show, you might not remember every single word said in the TV show, but you still learn something. Well, even if it's not a historical TV show, it might just be a comedy show, you still learn something. There's some, maybe in a later conversation with a friend, you might refer to something that happened in that TV show, or a movie, or a book. It could be a real serious book, or it could be just a fun book. And later on at some point, you'll be like, oh yeah, that's like this thing that happened in this book I once read. Now imagine, just like you right now might say, oh, that reminds me of a thing I saw in this TV show, you might be able to say, oh, that reminds me of a thing I saw in this passage that I read when I was taking the GMAT. Sounds crazy, right? But it's actually a little bit less impossible than what you might be doing right now. The human brain can hold about 7 pieces of information in its short-term working memory. If it's very simple information, maybe 9. If it's very, very complex information, maybe 5. Now, a long reading passage is obviously going to have more than 7 pieces of information. It's going to have more than 7 words, more than 7 ideas. It's going to have more stuff than that. If you actually understand it, though, you're not just juggling it in your short-term memory. You're actually learning it, and it becomes just part of your permanent memory. And your permanent memory can hold a nearly limitless amount of information, way more than 7 pieces of information, and also way more than 1 million pieces of information. That's what your permanent memory can do. So if you were actually saying, okay, I'm going to read this just the same way you read a book, the same way you watch a movie, I'm going to read this and understand what I'm reading, like really get what I'm reading, that's actually possible. Whereas if you say, I'm just going to kind of juggle all the information in this passage, that's not actually possible to do. When you get good at this, the questions you like the most now will be the ones you hate the most, and vice versa. Right now, the questions that most people like are questions like, on line 3, what does this word mean? Until you look back at line 3, you figure it out from context, and everyone's like, okay, that was great. But when you get good at this, here's what's going to happen. You're going to read the passage once, and you're going to understand the passage. You're going to understand the point of the passage. And you're going to love the questions that are asking you the ones that you are terrified of right now, the questions that say like, which of the following other things would this author support? Especially if you're doing the MCAT or something like that. Or which of this following statements would the author agree with? You're like, oh my God, I hate those. Those are terrifying. But here's the thing. If you actually get the passage, those are going to be your favorite questions because it's just about understanding what you know and just answering the question. And when you see a question that says on line 17, what does this word mean? You're like, oh my God, do I have to actually look back at the passage? That's so annoying. I already read it. In your current system, if you have 15 questions, you're reading the passage, skimming over 15 or 30 or 45 times. In this new system, you're going to read the passage once. And then you're going to read the answer choice, the actual questions also once. Now, here's the thing. There's a second part of this. It's not just skimming the passage where people don't really understand the passage and they kind of leap to the answer choice. As badly as people just barely skim the passage and barely read any of it, what they do with the answer choices is worse. So with the questions is worse. So I want you to take a look at it, just if you have a sample test or something like that, look at how long the actual questions are. And those questions, each question is probably the length of a paragraph or two in the actual passage. The length of time it takes to read the question should be about the length of time it takes to read a paragraph or two paragraphs. When you actually have understood the passage, and you've actually understood the questions, you won't be going back and forth 5,000 times. You'll be doing it once. That one time will take you longer than the time it took you to not learn anything from the passage. You'll read the answer choices once, you'll actually understand it, and you'll actually answer it, and you'll be reading it in the same way that you read things normally. And when you can do that, that's where you'll be able to get a perfect score on whatever reading passage you're working on.